The transport hissed to a stop, its ramp lowering onto the ferrocrete landing pad with a sigh of weary hydraulics. A woman stepped out, her figure indistinct against the harsh glare of the high desert sun. She carried a single, unassuming duffel bag. At Eegis command, the bleeding edge of global defense technology, arrivals were usually heralded by the thunder of tolls carrying decorated officers or the sleek hum of autonomous vehicles delivering celebrated scientists. This arrival was different. It was silent, almost apologetic. She wore the plain gray fatigues of a contract maintenance specialist, a uniform that served as a kind of institutional camouflage. Her name was Anya Petrova, and to the two board security personnel who checked her credentials, she was nobody. Her ID tag was basic, her clearance minimal, and her listed specialization, legacy systems calibration, was a euphemism for working on obsolete junk nobody else wanted to touch. One of the guards grunted, gesturing with his thumb toward the sprawling, monolithic structures of the base. Barracks are Sector Gamma. Workshop is Hangar 14. Try not to get lost, and try not to break anything. He didn't say important, but the implication hung in the dry, sterile air. Anya gave a short, single nod, her eyes sweeping over the facility. Eegis was an architectural marvel of brutalist efficiency. All sharp angles and reinforced concrete, designed to withstand anything short of a direct nuclear strike. Towers bristled with comms arrays and sensor domes, all pointed skyward like a congregation praying to a god of data. But Anya saw past the imposing facade. She saw the vulnerabilities. She noted the slight oscillation in a long-range comms dish, a sign of a misaligned bearing that would cause data degradation during peak atmospheric interference. She saw the heat shimmer above a ventilation nexus, indicating an overworked and inefficient cooling system. She saw these things not with the critical eye of a saboteur, but with the innate understanding of a master craftsman seeing flaws in a lesser artisan's work. She said nothing. Her silence was a deep, placid lake, and the guard's dismissal was a stone that skipped across its surface once before sinking without a trace. She shifted the duffel bag on her shoulder and began the long walk towards Sector Gamma, a ghost already forgotten by the man who had just admitted her. The base was a machine, and she was just another cog, indistinguishable, and, they assumed, easily replaced. It was an assumption that suited her perfectly. The less she was seen, the more she could see. Her quarters in Sector Gamma were what she expected, a small, sterile cube with a cot, a locker, and a single viewport looking out onto a dusty service road. It was a space designed for transient, unimportant people. She unpacked with practiced economy. There were no photographs, no mementos, no personal effects save for a small, worn book with a faded cover and Cyrillic lettering. She placed it on the small shelf above her cot, its presence a quiet act of defiance in the otherwise impersonal room. Her movements were fluid and deliberate, honed by years spent in places far less forgiving than this. As she changed into a fresh set of gray fatigues, the sleeve of her shirt rode up her forearm, revealing the edge of a tattoo. It wasn't the garish art favored by grunts and pilots. It was a series of precise, interlocking geometric lines, dark and sharp against her skin, almost like a circuit diagram or a fragment of some forgotten alphabet. She pulled the sleeve down, concealing it once more. It was a part of a life she had left behind, a language no one here could read. Or so she hoped. Her first day was scheduled to begin at 0600. She lay on the cot, not sleeping, but entering a state of controlled rest, her mind cataloging the sounds of the base, the distant roar of a jet engine test, the rhythmic clang of a maintenance droid, the low, ever-present hum of the power conduits beneath the floor. Each sound was a piece of a larger puzzle, and Anya had always been very, very good at puzzles. The next morning, she was summoned to the office of the base commander, Colonel Madsen. His office was on the top floor of the command spire, a panoramic window offering a god's-eye view of his domain. Madsen was a man carved from the same rigid material as the base itself. His uniform was immaculate, his posture ramrod straight, and his eyes held the cold, analytical glint of a man who measured the world in metrics and probabilities. He didn't ask her to sit. He remained standing behind his large, empty desk, tapping a stylus on the surface of a data slate that displayed her file. "Specialist Petrova," he began, his voice flat and devoid of warmth. "Your file is sparse." He let the word hang in the air, an accusation in itself. "It says you're qualified for legacy systems. Hangar 14 houses are mothballed training simulators. The Wraith 4 and 5 models. Obsolete, but we use them for basic cadet indoctrination. Frankly, it's a glorified janitorial post." He looked at her directly for the first time, his gaze dismissive. She didn't look like a high-performance operator. Her features were calm, almost plain, and she held herself with a quiet stillness that he misinterpreted as a lack of ambition or drive. In his world of aggressive Type A personalities, she was an anomaly and therefore a problem. "Eegis command is the tip of the spear," he continued, his tone hardening. "We do not carry dead weight. Every person here contributes to our operational readiness. Your posting was a directive from Central Command," one I questioned. "They insisted. So, I will ask you directly, what value can you possibly bring to my base?" Anya met his gaze without flinching. Her own eyes were a deep, steady gray, revealing nothing. She had faced men like Madsen before, men who confused authority with wisdom, who saw the world through the narrow aperture of a rank insignia. They were predictable. "I can provide efficiency," she said. Her voice was low and even, carrying no hint of defensiveness or subservience. Just a simple statement of fact. Madsen's lip curled into a faint sneer. "Efficiency," he repeated, as if the word were a foreign concept he found distasteful. "The Wraith 5 simulators have a 93% operational uptime. That is well within acceptable parameters. Your job is to keep them clean and run the diagnostics. Don't get creative. Don't deviate from the manual. Just do the job you were sent here to do, and stay out of the way of the people doing the real work." He gestured toward the door, a clear dismissal. "That will be all, Specialist." As Anya turned to leave, he added one final, cutting remark. "I'll be reviewing your position in 90 days. Don't give me a reason to terminate it sooner." Anya walked out of the office without a word. She hadn't expected a warm welcome. The system she was now a part of was designed to reject anything that didn't fit its rigid mold. Madsen wasn't her enemy. He was merely a function of that system, a gatekeeper guarding a kingdom of his own making. The real work, as he called it, was happening in the advanced hangars, with the new Wraith 7 and 8 models, piloted by the cocky Top Gun elites of the fleet. Hangar 14 was a backwater, a graveyard for old tech, and that was exactly where she needed to be. Hangar 14 was cavernous and quiet, a stark contrast to the buzzing activity elsewhere on the base. Dust motes danced in the shafts of light filtering through the high, clear-story windows. In the center of the vast space sat 2 bulky, angular machines, the Wraith 5 training simulators. They were relics of a previous generation of warfare, their hulls scarred with the marks of countless training cycles. To the hotshot pilots of Eegis, they were jokes, clumsy dinosaurs compared to the sleek, neural-linked pods they now used. To Anya, they were old soldiers. She walked a slow circle around the nearest simulator, her hand trailing lightly along its cold metal skin. She could feel the faint vibrations of its standby power, a weak but steady pulse. She ran her fingers over a maintenance panel, her touch not that of a mechanic, but of a physician examining a patient. She saw the hairline fractures in the casing that the standard diagnostics would miss, felt the subtle imbalance in the gyroscopic housing. The young technicians assigned to the main hangar saw machines as collections of parts to be replaced. Anya saw them as integrated systems, each with its own history, its own quirks, its own memory. A young, eager technician named Jax was overseeing a diagnostic routine when she arrived. He gave her a cursory nod. "You must be Petrova," he said, not looking up from his datapad. "Just follow the checklist. If a light turns red, log it. Don't try to fix anything yourself. The senior techs handle all repairs." Anya didn't respond. Her attention was fixed on the main control console. She watched the lines of code scroll by on the diagnostic screen, a language she understood intimately. Her gaze was so intense, so focused, that Jax finally looked up, a flicker of curiosity breaking through his professional indifference. He noticed the tattoo for the first time as her sleeve slid back an inch. The intricate, dark lines seemed to absorb the hanger's dim light. "Cool ink," he commented. "What is it?" Anya pulled her sleeve down, her expression unchanging. "Just a pattern," she said. But Jax saw something in her eyes, a brief flicker of a distant world before the shutters came down again. She continued her silent observation, her focus absolute. She spotted it then, a single line of corrupted code that flashed on the screen for less than a nanosecond, an anomaly so faint it was practically a ghost. The system's automated checks didn't register it. Jax didn't see it, but Anya did. It was a symptom of a deeper illness, a flaw in the machine's core logic that, under the right kind of pressure, could lead to catastrophic failure. She made a mental note, filing the information away in the vast, silent archive of her mind. She knew, with chilling certainty, that the pressure would come. It always did. The base, and the men who ran it, thought she was useless. They had put her in a forgotten corner to watch over forgotten machines. They had no idea that she was the one person on the entire base who understood that the past is never truly dead, and that old ghosts have a habit of coming back to haunt you. The pressure came sooner than anyone expected. It started not in Anya's forgotten hangar, but in the gleaming, high-tech cathedral of Hangar 7, home of the elite Wraith 8 Simulator Squadron. A critical certification trial for a new batch of top-tier pilots was underway. These weren't cadets. They were the best of the best, and the simulation was a brutal, unforgiving scenario designed to push them to their absolute limits. Colonel Madsen observed from the glass-walled control room, his arms crossed, a look of stern satisfaction on his face. This was his domain. This was the real work. Then the alarms blared. On the main tactical display, the lead pilot's simulator, designated Alpha 1, went haywire. Its virtual avatar began to spin erratically, ignoring the pilot's commands. The calm, professional chatter of the control room dissolved into a flurry of panicked shouts. "Alpha 1 is unresponsive. I've lost control." The pilot's voice crackled over the comms, laced with confusion and fear. "What's happening?" "The gyros are offline. I'm in a flat spin." The lead technician, a man named Corvin whose arrogance was matched only by his ambition, shoved his way to the primary console. "It's pilot error," he snapped, his fingers flying across the keypad. He must have pushed the system too hard, but the diagnostics told a different story. Red lights cascaded across the screen. Core logic failure. Gyroscopic matrix desynchronized. System integrity compromised. Corvin's confident facade began to crack. He and his team threw every diagnostic they had at the problem, their efforts becoming increasingly frantic. They rebooted subsystems, rerouted power, and attempted to force a manual override. Nothing worked. The multi-billion-dollar simulator was, for all intents and purposes, a brick. Madsen's face was a mask of thunderous fury. A VIP delegation from Central Command was arriving in 2 days to witness the final phase of the certification. A failure of this magnitude was not just an embarrassment. It was a direct reflection on his leadership. "Fix it, Corvin," he ordered, his voice dangerously low. But Corvin and his team were out of their depth. They were part swappers, trained to follow flowcharts and replace modules. This was something different, something deeper in the machine's soul that they couldn't reach. The hours bled by. The hangar, once a symbol of cutting-edge perfection, became a scene of frustrated incompetence. Tempers frayed. Voices were raised. The sleek, beautiful machine sat inert and defiant, a monument to their failure. Through it all, Anya continued her work in the quiet solitude of Hangar 14. She had heard the alarms, of course. The entire base had. But she remained focused on her task, methodically calibrating the ancient Wraith 5s with a watchmaker's precision. Jax, the young technician, was a nervous wreck, constantly checking his datapad for updates from Hangar 7. "They're completely stumped," he told Anya, his voice a mix of awe and anxiety. Corvin is blaming a software bug from the latest patch, but no one can isolate it. The whole program is on hold. Anya paused her work, looking from the old machine in front of her to the distant, troubled hangar. She said nothing, but her eyes held a profound, unsettling calm. She had seen this before. She recognized the symptoms. The ghost she had seen in the code of her own obsolete machines was a precursor, an ancestor to the demon that was now tearing apart the newest, most advanced system on the base. The new tech was built upon the foundations of the old, and the architects had forgotten to check for inherited sins. The tension on the base was a palpable thing, a low-frequency hum of anxiety that set everyone's teeth on edge. The pilots were grounded, the technicians were defeated, and Colonel Madsen was quietly raging. As the sun set, casting long, dramatic shadows across the facility, the team in Hangar 7 finally admitted defeat. They powered down the failed simulator, their shoulders slumped in exhaustion. The problem would have to wait for the morning. Later that night, long after the official shifts had ended, Hangar 7 was dark and silent. A single figure slipped through a side service door, moving with a silent grace that belied the bulky maintenance uniform. It was Anya. She navigated the labyrinth of equipment with an unnerving familiarity, her path certain in the deep gloom. She had not been given clearance for this hangar, but clearance was a concept for those who follow the rules. Anya followed a different code. The work must be done. She wasn't alone. Jax, unable to sleep, had returned to the hangar, driven by a nagging curiosity. He saw her approach the dead simulator and froze in the shadows, his heart pounding. He was about to call security, but something stopped him. The way she moved, the absolute confidence in her posture, held him captivated. He decided to watch. Anya didn't bother with the main console. She knew it was useless. Instead, she knelt and opened a low-profile access panel near the base of the machine, one that was sealed with a manufacturer's warning. She bypassed the electronic lock with a small, specialized tool she produced from her pocket. Inside was a mess of fiber optic cables and processing nodes. To Jax, it was an indecipherable tangle. To Anya, it was a familiar language. She unspooled a cable from her belt and plugged her own custom datapad, a ruggedized, military-grade model that looked nothing like the standard-issue slates, directly into the machine's primary neural nexus. The screen of her datapad lit up, bathing her face in a soft, green glow. Instead of the polished, graphical interface used by the base technicians, her screen was filled with raw, cascading lines of root-level code. It was the machine's most fundamental operating system, a digital abyss that Corvin and his team wouldn't have dared to enter. Her fingers began to move across the holographic keyboard, not with the frantic pecking of the other techs, but with the fluid, rhythmic grace of a concert pianist. She wasn't running diagnostics. She was having conversation. She bypassed the corrupted subroutines that had stumped the others, delving deeper and deeper into the core programming. Jax watched, mesmerized. She wasn't following a manual. She was innovating, creating, writing new lines of code on the fly, patching the holes in the system's logic with an artistry that was breathtaking. She found the source of the problem, a fatal flaw in the gyroscopic stabilization algorithm, a tiny miscalculation in a recursive loop that, when put under the extreme stress of the certification scenario, created a feedback cascade that overwhelmed the system. It was the same family of error she had seen in the Wraith 5. The new designers, in their arrogance, had copied and pasted a block of legacy code without fully understanding its limitations. Anya didn't just fix the error. She rewrote the entire algorithm from the ground up, making it more robust, more efficient, more elegant. After 10 minutes of intense, silent work, she stopped. She unplugged her datapad, sealed the panel, and stood up. She placed a hand on the simulator's hull, a silent, reassuring gesture. Then, she walked to the main console and pressed the power button. The simulator hummed to life. Every light on the board was green. The diagnostics ran a perfect, clean cycle. The machine was not just fixed, it was better. Jax stepped out of the shadows, his face a mixture of terror and awe. How he stammered. How did you do that? No one could even get into the root OS. Anya looked at him, her expression unreadable in the dim light. She considered her answer for a long moment. Old systems have old ghosts, she said softly. You just have to know how to speak their language. She then turned and walked out of the hangar, leaving Jax standing alone with the perfectly humming, resurrected machine, his entire understanding of the world quietly falling to pieces. The next morning, Hangar 7 was a scene of bewildered triumph. Corvin arrived to find his unsolvable problem had vanished. The Wraith 8 was running flawlessly. Unwilling to admit his own defeat, he quickly claimed credit, spinning a tale of a late-night breakthrough and a proprietary software patch he had developed. Few believed him, but no one could prove otherwise. Except for Colonel Madsen. Madsen was no one's fool. The moment he heard the simulator was operational, he went straight to the system logs. What he found made his blood run cold. The log showed a system access event at 2:17, using a root-level override that officially didn't exist. The digital signature was untraceable, a ghost, as the system flagged it. There was no record of Corvin or his team being anywhere near the hangar at that time. But the security logs showed something else, a single maintenance tech entering and leaving the hangar. Specialist Anya Petrova. Madsen's carefully ordered world tilted on its axis. He summoned Jax to his office. The young technician, pale and nervous, recounted what he had seen, his voice filled with a reverence that Madsen could not ignore. The story was unbelievable, but the evidence was undeniable. The machine was working. Madsen dismissed Jax and sat alone in his office for a long time, staring at Anya's sparse file. Legacy Systems Calibration. The title was a mockery now. He had dismissed her, insulted her, and relegated her to a forgotten corner of his base. And in return, she had anonymously saved his most important program and his career. He found her in Hangar 14, calmly polishing the viewport of a Wraith 5. The air in the old hangar seemed different now, charged with a new kind of silence. It was no longer the silence of neglect, but the silence of profound competence. Specialist, Madsen said, his voice stripped of its earlier arrogance. It was now cautious, curious. The Wraith 8 in Hangar 7 experienced a spontaneous recovery last night. The system logs show a ghost in the machine. Care to comment? Anya didn't stop her work. She continued to wipe the glass in slow, deliberate circles. The machine is stable, she replied, her voice as even as ever. It wasn't a denial, but it wasn't a confession either. It was a simple statement of the outcome, the only thing that mattered. Madsen felt a surge of frustration, but he suppressed it. He was dealing with something far outside his experience. Corvin is taking credit, he pushed. No one saw him there. Anya finally paused, turning to face him. Her gray eyes were like polished stones. Does it matter who gets the credit, Colonel, as long as the work is done? The question was so direct, so devoid of ego, that it disarmed him completely. He had spent his entire career in a world of promotions, commendations, and political maneuvering. The idea of pure, anonymous competence was utterly alien to him. The perception of Anya Petrova began to shift. The pilots who flew the newly repaired simulator noticed the difference immediately. The controls were smoother, the feedback more intuitive, the performance ceiling higher than it had ever been. They started calling the unknown fixer the ghost of Eegis, a mythical figure who tuned their machines to perfection in the dead of night. The whispers started to spread, first among the pilots, then the technicians. They began to look at the quiet woman in Hangar 14 with a new sense of wonder and suspicion. They saw her silent dedication, her economy of motion, the way the old machines seemed to respond to her presence. The woman they had dismissed as useless was now an enigma, and the mystery was about to deepen into a legend. The true test came a week later, under a sky the color of bruised metal. A storm was rolling in from the mountains, a churning mass of black clouds and electrostatic fury. Despite the worsening weather, a critical live-fire exercise was ordered to proceed. The objective was to test the new long-range autonomous control suite of a combat-ready Wraith 9 drone, the most advanced and most dangerous piece of hardware on the base. The drone, call sign Argus, was launched into the turbulent sky, its mission to identify and engage a series of decommissioned tanks in a remote desert quadrant. For the first 20 minutes, the mission was flawless. In the command center, Madsen and his team watched the telemetry on the main screen, the drone's camera feed showing a surreal, storm-tossed landscape. Then, a massive fork of lightning split the sky, striking a communications relay on a nearby ridge. The screens in the command center dissolved into a blizzard of static. A klaxon began to sound, a shrill, piercing cry of technological failure. "Loss of signal," a controller yelled. "We've lost the data link to Argus." The room erupted into controlled chaos. They tried to re-establish the link, frantically sending out command signals that were swallowed by the storm's electromagnetic interference. On a secondary screen, a tracking beacon showed the drone's last known trajectory. It was still flying, now completely autonomous, blind and deaf to their commands. Worse, it was defaulting to its last received instruction: seek and destroy targets in its designated patrol box. The problem was, its patrol box bordered a civilian transportation corridor. The storm had pushed it off course. A multi-million-dollar killing machine was now a rogue agent, and they had less than 10 minutes before it could potentially cross into civilian airspace. Panic began to curdle into despair. Every attempt to regain control failed. The drone's onboard AI, designed for combat, was too sophisticated to be easily disabled. It was programmed to treat a loss of command link as a potential enemy jamming attempt and to continue its mission aggressively. Madsen's face was ashen. This wasn't a failed simulation anymore. This was a potential catastrophe with real-world consequences. In that moment of absolute crisis, he made a decision that would have been unthinkable a week ago. "Give me Petrova," he commanded, his voice tight. "Get her in here now." Two airmen practically dragged Anya from Hangar 14. She entered the frenetic, high-stakes environment of the command center without a change in her placid expression. The contrast was jarring. The room was a symphony of panic, while she was a pocket of absolute calm. "Specialist," Madsen said, his voice strained. He pointed to the tactical map, showing the drone's terrifyingly steady path. "We've lost it. Can you do anything?" He wasn't asking as a colonel to a subordinate. He was pleading. Anya didn't answer. She walked to an auxiliary console, one the other technicians had abandoned as useless. She took a seat, her movements unhurried. The room fell silent, all eyes fixed on the quiet woman in the gray fatigues. She ignored the primary control interface, the one designed with user-friendly graphics and safety protocols. Instead, she opened a raw data terminal, a black screen that immediately filled with a waterfall of incomprehensible code. It was the raw telemetry stream from the drone, unfiltered, uncollated noise to everyone else in the room. To Anya, it was a conversation. Her fingers flew across the keyboard. She wasn't trying to send a command signal. She knew the storm made that impossible. She was doing something far more audacious. She was tapping into the low-level maintenance handshake protocol, a deeply embedded diagnostic language that operated on a completely different frequency. She was bypassing the drone's tactical AI and speaking directly to its core motor functions. She began to write a patch on the fly, a new set of instructions coded in the machine's most primitive language. She couldn't see through its cameras, but she could feel its orientation through the raw gyroscopic data. She could read its engine output, its altitude, its velocity. It was like performing remote surgery on a patient's heart using only a stethoscope. She coaxed the drone into a gentle, banking turn away from the civilian corridor. She bled off its velocity, reduced its altitude, fighting the storm's violent crosswinds with tiny, precise adjustments that were invisible on the main tactical display, but were a life-and-death struggle on her screen. Slowly, painstakingly, she guided the rogue drone back toward the base. She couldn't land it conventionally, but she could guide it to a safe crash zone in an unpopulated sector of the desert. With a final string of commands, she cut its engine power and forced it into a controlled glide. The room watched in breathless silence as the drone's icon on the map slid into the designated zone and stopped. A moment later, a controller confirmed it. Impact confirmed in safe zone. No casualties. The asset is down. A wave of collective relief washed through the command center. They had averted disaster. But it wasn't they who had done it. It was the woman sitting silently at the console, her hands now resting in her lap, her face illuminated by the scrolling lines of code. She had single-handedly wrestled a ghost from the storm and brought it back to Earth. The investigation into the Argus incident was immediate and severe. Within hours, a VTOL screamed onto the landing pad at Eegis, and from it emerged General Thorne. Thorne was a man who cast a long shadow, both literally and figuratively. He was built like a retired heavyweight boxer, with a face that looked like it had been carved from granite and left out in the rain. He was the head of the entire Special Warfare Command, a living legend whispered about in classified briefings, a man whose displeasure could end careers with a single word. He stormed into the command center, his fury a palpable force that silenced the room. "Madsen," he boomed, his voice like rocks grinding together. "Explain to me how my most advanced unmanned asset went rogue on your watch." Madsen stood his ground, recounting the events with clipped, professional accuracy, the storm, the signal loss, the failure of their protocols. He left the most important part for last. "Sir," he concluded, his voice steady, "we were unable to re-establish control through conventional means. The situation was resolved by a specialist on my staff." Thorne's eyes narrowed. "A specialist? One of Corvin's tech gurus?" "No, sir," Madsen said, and gestured toward the corner of the room where Anya was standing, quietly observing, as always. "Specialist Anya Petrova." Thorne's gaze swept over Anya, and the dismissal was instant and total. He saw a plain woman in a low-ranking uniform, a non-entity. He was about to unleash a tirade about competence and command responsibility when he stopped. Something had caught his eye. He took a step closer, his focus zeroing in on her left forearm, where her sleeve had ridden up slightly during the commotion. He saw the tattoo. He took another step, his expression shifting from anger to utter disbelief. He reached out, his hand trembling almost imperceptibly, and gently pushed the sleeve further up her arm, revealing the full design. It wasn't a random pattern. It wasn't just ink. It was a language he knew, a language spoken only in the deepest, darkest shadows of the world. It was the operational sigil of a ghost unit so secret that its existence was officially denied by the highest echelons of government. Project Chimera. Each interlocking geometric shape on her arm was not a kill count. It was a record of strategic assets neutralized. A small, sharp diamond for an enemy command and control network. A coiled serpent for a high-value political target. A jagged starburst for an entire armor division, wiped out in a single, surgical night operation. And there, near her wrist, was the largest, most complex symbol of all. A black sun with a shattered crown at its center. The mark for Operation Tartarus Gate, the mission that had single-handedly toppled a rogue state. An operation so brutal and so successful that all records of it had been purged, and its participants listed as killed in action to ensure its secrecy. Thorne's face, a mask of granite moments before, drained of all color. The air rushed from his lungs. He didn't scream. The sound he made was far more terrifying. It was a choked, guttural gasp of pure, undiluted fear and reverence. He took an involuntary step back, as if he'd just seen a specter from a forgotten war. His eyes, wide with a horror that bordered on worship, locked with hers. He knew who she was. He knew the legend. The field reports had given her a name, a call sign whispered by enemies and allies alike, a name synonymous with impossible success and ruthless efficiency. "Nix," he breathed, the word barely a whisper, but it echoed in the stunned silence of the command center like a thunderclap. The ghost. The Nightfall. The most feared and effective operator of the Chimera program. The woman they all thought had died during Tartarus Gate. And she was standing here in a maintenance uniform in a backwater training base, polishing old simulators. The general, a man who had faced down warlords and terrorists without flinching, was staring at a living myth, and he was terrified. Not of what she would do to him, but of what she represented. A level of competence and lethality so far beyond his own that he felt like a child in the presence of a god. The transformation in the command center was instantaneous and absolute. General Thorne, his face still pale, immediately barked an order. "Everyone out. Now!" Only Colonel Madsen stays. The room cleared in seconds, the technicians and controllers scrambling for the exits, their faces a mixture of confusion and awe. They didn't know what the general had seen, but they had seen his reaction, and that was enough. The legend of the ghost of Eegis had just become terrifyingly real. Once the doors hissed shut, Thorne's entire demeanor shifted. The fury was gone, replaced by a profound, almost fearful respect. He turned to Madsen, his voice low and urgent. "Colonel, do you have any idea who you have on your base?" Madsen, still reeling from the general's reaction, could only shake his head. "I know she is. Exceptional, sir." Thorne let out a short, harsh laugh that held no humor. "Exceptional? Colonel, that woman is not a specialist. She is a force of nature. She is Nyx, Project Chimera's alpha operator. The official records say she died in the Alkadir collapse. We held a memorial for a closed casket." He gestured toward Anya, who had remained silent through the entire exchange. She single-handedly dismantled 3 separate enemy intelligence agencies. The tattoo you see on her arm isn't for kills. It's for campaigns. Each one of those symbols represents an operation that saved thousands of lives, at a cost we will never speak of. Madsen looked from the fearsome general to the quiet woman in the corner, and his entire world recalibrated. Every interaction he'd had with her replayed in his mind. His condescension, his dismissal, her quiet, unwavering responses. He had been a fool, blind and arrogant. The word, as it always does in a closed military environment, spread. Not the details. Those were buried under layers of classification so deep they were practically theoretical. But the core truth disseminated like a shockwave. It wasn't what was said, but how it was said. Thorne's reaction, Madsen's sudden and complete deference, the immediate lockdown of the command center. Whispers turned into hushed, reverent rumors. The next morning, when Anya walked into Hangar 14, something was different. The handful of junior technicians who had once ignored her stopped what they were doing. They straightened up, their eyes following her with a mixture of fear and admiration. As she passed the main bay of Hangar 7, a group of elite pilots, the same ones who had snickered at the relics she maintained, were standing by their state-of-the-art simulators. As one, they stopped their conversations, turned to face her, and stood at perfect, rigid attention. It wasn't an order. It was a spontaneous, primal acknowledgement of a superior predator. The cocky, arrogant flyboys were saluting a maintenance tech. Corvin, the lead technician who had tried to steal her glory, saw her coming and quickly busied himself with a console, unable to meet her gaze, his face burning with shame. Anya didn't preen. She didn't smile. She didn't acknowledge the gesture with any grand display. She simply gave a small, almost imperceptible nod of her head, a gesture that was both an acceptance and a dismissal. The respect was noted, but the work was what mattered. She continued on her way to Hangar 14, the silent, powerful sea of respect parting before her. In the days that followed, Eegis Command was a changed place. A quiet, unspoken reverence now surrounded Anya Petrova. No one called her specialist anymore. They mostly avoided calling her anything, speaking to her only when necessary, their voices tinged with a deference usually reserved for men with stars on their collars. Madsen had offered her a promotion, a senior advisory role, anything she wanted. She had politely refused. She preferred the quiet solitude of Hangar 14. She had not come here for glory or rank. She had come for peace. The final image of her transformation from ghost to legend was not one of action, but of stillness. One evening, as the desert sun bled across the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, Anya stood alone in the vast, echoing space of her hangar. The 2 old Wraith 5 simulators, her silent companions, were powered down, their surfaces gleaming under her meticulous care. She walked to the chassis of the rogue drone, Argus, which had been recovered and brought here for analysis. Its metal skin was scored and dented from the control crash, but its core systems were intact. She placed her hand flat against its cold hull. For a long moment, she stood there, a silent communion between the master and the machine. The drone's emergency lights, still drawing on a reserve battery, pulsed with a soft, rhythmic glow like a steady, sleeping heartbeat. The last rays of the setting sun sliced through the high windows of the hangar, falling directly across her forearm. The intricate, dark lines of the tattoo stood out in sharp relief, a map of a violent past now resting in a haven of quiet. The institutional arrogance of Eegis had been broken, not by force, but by the undeniable, silent strength of a single individual. The system hadn't changed her. She had been its occupants to a new understanding. The respect she now commanded was not demanded. It was earned. It was absolute. And, like her, it was silent. She was no longer Specialist Petrova, the useless cog, nor was she Nyx, the feared ghost of war. In the quiet hum of the hangar, surrounded by the old machines that understood her language, she was simply Anya, a master of her craft, finally at rest. The silence was no longer empty. It was full of honor.